Well, hello and welcome to the 29th Annual Environmental Film Festival in the nation's capital, and tonight's event around the film Inhabitants, an Indigenous Perspective. I'm Torben Rick. I'm a curator of North American archaeology at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History here in Washington, D.C., and I'll be moderating tonight's discussion. We're going to give it just a few more minutes while people kind of filter in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, looks like we can get started now. Hello again, I'm Torben Rick. I'm a curator of North American archaeology at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History here in Washington, D.C. Today's program is offered in collaboration between the National Museum of Natural History and the Environmental Film Festival in the nation's capital. It's our pleasure to welcome you for this kickoff event. We will be hosting 3 more events this week alongside the festival, so be sure to check our website for more information. The museum has been a proud partner of the DC Environmental Film Festival for the past 29 years. We'd like to thank the Environmental Film Festival for being a great partner, not only during the festival, but throughout the year. Now, we're extremely excited to welcome everyone to this panel discussion of Inhabitants and Indigenous Perspective. I personally am very excited to be moderating it tonight. It was an amazing film that really built on perspectives and issues that I've been thinking about for a long time. Now, from the forests of California and Wisconsin to the deserts of Arizona, Inhabitants focuses on land use practices in several Native American tribes and Native Hawaiians. The Natural History Museum in Washington, D.C. are located in the traditional homeland of the Kotutwa Piscataway people, who also have similarly rich environmental knowledge and cultural traditions. I'd like to thank the Environmental Film Festival in the nation's capital for making the film Inhabitants available, which was shared in the registration confirmation email. If you didn't have a chance to see the film yet, you can watch after the discussion until the festival ends on March 28th. I highly recommend you do so. I've seen it 3 times now, and each time I've seen something more nuanced than the one before. So before we get started, and I promise we're going to do that in just a second, I wanted to say a few housekeeping notes. The discussion offers closed captioning. This can be turned on via the settings gear icon in the lower right corner in Eventive. If you have a question you'd like to ask our panelists, please use the chat box in Eventive. We'll be watching submissions throughout the program, so feel free to ask your questions at any time, and we'll get to as many as we can during the audience Q&A portion at the end. Also, if your question is for someone specific, please let us know when you submit the question, and we'll make sure to address that person. All right, let's get going here. As I mentioned before, our program is a conversation around and inspired by the work featured in the film Inhabitants, an Indigenous Perspective. Our panelists tonight include Dr. Michael Kotutwa Johnson, a member of the Hopi tribe in northern Arizona. Dr. Johnson is a traditional Hopi farmer and has given extensive lectures on the topic of Hopi dryland farming. Dr. Johnson received his Bachelor of Science degree in agriculture from Cornell University, a master's in public policy from Pepperdine University, and his PhD in natural resource management at the University of Arizona. Prior to his PhD work, he served as a United States Department of Agriculture Natural Resource Conservation Service district conservationist on the Hopi Reservation. Dr. Johnson's latest publication is called Barriers to PES Programs in Indigenous Communities, A Lesson in Land Tenure Insecurity from the Hopi Indian Reservation, published in the journal Ecosystem Services. Anna Palmer is co-director of Inhabitants, an Indigenous Perspective. Anna Palmer was born in Stockholm, Sweden, and grew up in the Hudson Valley of New York. She received her Master's of Science in Environmental Studies in 2017 and began working for the USDA, helping tribes in the Southwest on climate change adaptation planning. Since then, Anna has continued her work with tribes, creating educational resources and media. Costa Boutsikaris is co-director of Inhabitants, an Indigenous Perspective. Costa grew up in Hudson Valley of New York and began working on documentaries as a teenager when he got an opportunity to intern with Jonathan Demme. After receiving his BA in film at the Mason Gross School of the Arts, he began work as a cinematographer shooting for PBS. In 2015, Costa shot, directed, and edited his first feature documentary entitled Inhabit, a Permaculture Perspective, which took home the Audience Choice Award at the Environmental Film Festival at Yale and won Best in Theme at the Wild and Scenic Film Festival. Dr. Dorothy Lippert is a citizen of the Choctaw Nation and an archaeologist. She is a tribal liaison in the Repatriation Office of the National Museum of Natural History, where she responds to repatriation requests from U.S. tribes for human remains, funerary objects, sacred objects, and objects of cultural patrimony, according to the provisions of the National Museum of the American Indian Act. Dr. Lippert's research interests include the development of Indigenous archaeology, repatriation, ethics, and the archaeology of the Southeastern United States. It's a very exciting and diverse group, as you can see. And without further ado, I'd like to bring them all on and get started. Everyone out in cyberspace is giving us a warm round of applause, I think. What I'd like to do is start off here with a question first for the co-directors, for Anna and Costa. The 5 stories, from Hopi to Karuk to Blackfeet, Hawaii, and Menominee are all really rich and diverse. You've woven together deep connections between the past and present and culture and the environment. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about why you made the film and what the process was like.
Yeah, thanks, Tori. Good evening, everyone. Costa and I are joining you from the mid-Hudson Valley of New York, which is the ancestral land of the Lenape-Munsee people, past, present, and future. And the idea for the film really began in 2018. I was doing climate research at the Desert Research Institute under a grant of the USDA. And we were working with tribes in the Southwest, studying what climate adaptation would mean for them. And through that work, I got to attend a lot of academic conferences that brought together academics with government agencies like the USDA and the Environmental Protection Agency, the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And through conversations with tribal leaders in these academic conference spaces, it became really clear that their land stewardship practices and their knowledge wasn't being given enough credit, support, or recognition in this broader climate change conversation. And that is where we started to talk to people about what would it be like if we could make a documentary highlighting your story from your perspective that was only centering the Native perspective as the upfront, most foremost story. And at that point is when Costa, who is the filmmaker, came on to start advising the film production process.
Yeah, and so that process kind of started with these partnerships that Anna had made through working with USDA and these tribes in the Southwest, and the beginning of that was really developing a strategy with these tribal project leaders about how do they want their story being told, what was the best way to tell it, who should we speak to, and what are the resources we need to use to kind of meet the needs of the community. So the goal in the beginning was really to set out and really just document kind of the seasonality on the ground, what it really looked like to see these stewardship practices in action, and getting to be with Michael in the spring, planting and visiting prescribed burns, and kind of capturing the on the ground action. And through that process, we really quickly realized that for outsiders like ourselves, the context of these projects, it's so important to understand the history and understand how colonization really disrupted these practices. So we shifted focus a little bit into looking for help from the community to how do we tell that part of the history, and getting more interviews, and asking for resources around photographs and archival footage. So that was kind of the first shift in our process. And then when we finished filming and we've kind of starting to put the film together, we also started to see and learn, and are continuing to learn, a really important theme that we're seeing today as more media begins to cover native practices, especially around prescribed burning and dryland farming. There tends to be a buzzword around this idea of native solutions. And as much as that is true and really important, we also realize that when you call it a native solution, it's kind of, you're skipping over a lot of the history, and that, it's not just a solution, it's also a continuation of something that's been happening for thousands of years. So we're also trying to help with this film reframe, this idea that it's just a solution, and try and really help tell that bigger story, and create a platform for folks to tell their stories. So, we've been really honored to work with people, and especially Michael Kotutwa Johnson, who's here tonight, who really, opened up his world to us and brought us into his life in a really intense time when he was defending his PhD thesis. And he just has, this is one of the busiest guys I've ever met. So we're just so lucky he could join us here tonight on Sunday. So yeah, thank you guys for being here.
Yeah, maybe we could, before we go to Michael, maybe we could just follow up on that for a second. One of the things I was intrigued by was that it seemed to me you really wanted to get this story right, so you focus solely on first person storytelling throughout, but you also, I noticed that you had a tribal advisory board set up. Is that true? Is that part of the process?
Yeah, so early on, we wanted to do this film as collaboratively as we could. And to have a tribal advisory board is basically what we set up, is basically a way for people to advise all parts of the process, whether that's like who should we speak to about certain topics, and then also sending people edits of the film and how it was going, and giving us good feedback. Michael Kotutwa, he's a filmmaker. He doesn't know it, but he gave us some amazing critiques and amazing feedback, and he's been a real co-creator in this project. So we've definitely had this from the onset, this focus on collaboration.
That's great. Thank you. So Michael, why don't we go to you for a question? Personally, I was really moved by your personal story. It's really compelling. You highlight this sort of deep connection between people and nature. You weave in your own personal journey, overcoming personal and then larger struggles. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about why you wanted to share your story in this documentary.
You're muted.
I think you're still muted.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just first want to thank those other tribes that were in the film, the Blackfeet Nation, the Kruik Nation, the Hawaiians over there in the Big Island, the Menominee tribe, and the Hopi tribe out here. I had some members that participated in this film, especially my father. He's 88 years old, and so I've learned a lot from him and my grandfather before him. But I think one of the main things that I really enjoyed, and one of the main reasons why dollars to do this film is because during my academic work, as you saw from the film, people looked at what we do as kind of being primitive, or they kind of look at things not really the way they are supposed to be. And so I wanted to bring recognition. For me, it's all about bringing recognition, to practices and techniques that have been here for well over 10,000 years and not so longer. One of the biggest statistics that I like to talk about is out there is that the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity Ecosystem Services, documented that Indigenous peoples protect 80% of global biodiversity on a mere 25% of the planet's land, with less than 5% of the world's population. And if you really think about that, that is an amazing thing, and we have to protect that. And so what I hope to do, and what I hope to do at some point, is to talk about this and get our techniques recognized and for what they are, for the validity of what they are. We always talk about, regenerative agriculture or sustainability, but we've been doing these things for 10,000 years. People just put fancy names on things, right? And so it's kind of fun just to get some of that recognition back and give the credit to the people who actually came up with the process in the first place. And so that's kind of a little longer answer than I wanted to talk about, but you know, that's kind of why I decided to do this film, because I really wanted to bring recognition back to the people who have been doing these practices. And one more thing is, you know, it wasn't for us, it wasn't about economics as far as what we do traditionally, but it's all about survival. You probably saw that word a number of times in the film. It's really about survival. We had to do these things to survive, and we're going to need to do these things in order to survive in the future. And so, you know, it's just lessons learned. And so that's about all I have to say on that. Thanks for asking. And I also want to thank one more thing. I want to thank Costa and Anna there for coming out and helping me out here too, and portraying the film the way they did, because, you know, they deserve a lot of credit for this, because they brought Native involvement into it. They listened to us, and we wasn't the first person. And so we got to tell our own story. And I think that's more important than anything else, that we tell our own story. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So let's turn to Dorothy quickly, and then Michael, I want to come back to you in just a second. So, you know, Inhabitants shows us the deep connections between people, place, and ecology, but it also highlights the really ugly effects of colonialism and Native American oppression, disenfranchisement, and genocide. Now, the Smithsonian and other natural history museums, you know, we're rooted in colonialism. It's a challenge that the Smithsonian and other museums are reckoning with, and that we really need to do a lot more about as we move forward. Central among the goals we have as a museum and an institution is enhanced collaboration with Indigenous communities. Now, Dorothy is a part of our repatriation program, as we said earlier. And Dorothy, I was hoping you could talk a little about repatriation at the Smithsonian and how you see it connects to some of the themes of Inhabitants.
Sure. So what I really loved about the film was that it there were several great themes that ran through it that I thought fit well with the way repatriation plays out. And so for those of you who don't really know the basics of repatriation, we return human remains and cultural objects to Indian tribes as part of federal law. And our office works specifically with the collections of the Natural History Museum. And so it can be a pretty difficult process, both for the museum and for the tribes to work on, just because it's such a sensitive thing to do. But it brings a lot of, you know, interesting benefits. And the themes in the film that I thought really resonated with repatriation were themes of resilience. You know, the idea about the plants and the land coming back with appropriate cultural practices. The theme of responsibility to the land and responsibility to Native people. And then just this idea of hope for the future. And I see that running through the work of repatriation, and also, you know, it was definitely, you know, such a big part of the film.
Yeah, that process of renewal, you know, it's something that comes up several times in the film, is definitely something that I think is part of repatriation. It's part of that healing. And one of the things Michael did so well, I think, was hit on that hard stop that happened during the colonial era, that hard stop where we sort of ignored all of the knowledge of people who lived, as Michael said, for millennia, you know, the plural form, and moving in these new techniques. And it's really kind of the time for that to change, I think, and repatriation is a big part of that. Michael, I'm wondering if we can circle back to you. So I was frantically, on the times I was watching the movie, writing down quotes, because you have just line after line of really informative and insightful comments throughout it. A couple of these that I thought were great were like, you know, you don't see a John Deere out there, you see little Hopis with a John Deere hat on and a planting stick. You know, and then you would say, I remember you walking through the film, the fields in the beginning of the film, and you're saying, you know, these are our children, as you're looking at the plants, and as the corn and lima beans, I think it was. And then towards the end, you circle back and you say, this is about survival. So little kids can hold corn like this 100 years from now. So while so much of your knowledge is built on the past, you're also thinking about the future. That's really kind of where your head is. And I'm wondering how we get people to see the deep connections and legacies that you talk about and their relevance to today and the future. How do we get this mainstream?
You know, I think, you know, films like this are a great starting point. I think they're necessary. You know, I think, you know, when these organizations who promote things like the green thing that's out there, I forgot what it's called, and, you know, Biden's 30 and 30, and, you know, and some of the other policies that are coming down the pipe, and climate change, you know, it's so important to involve Indigenous voices at the community level. You know, for the longest time, we've always been kind of left out and placed on the back burner. And, and we find out about something after the fact. And so it's that we need to be there. We need to actually have the voices. And so, that means, in order to get to the table, unfortunately, a lot of people have to have a degree like I do. They have to have a PhD in order to get invited. And so, we need to reinforce our education out there too for the younger generation to get them involved in this type of thing. And if they choose not to, that's fine also, but, when I talk about kids and I talk about, just the type of agriculture we do, it's really faith-based, it's what we believe in. We've been doing this forever, and even if we have a drought, like I said, we're still going to go out and plant because that's who we are as Hopi. That's who we are. And so, that whole concept of, looking at these things like they're kids, they are our children, they're our children in more ways than one, because we take care of them like that. There's one little thing I do, when there's like a little baby naming ceremony that they talk about, that we have out here, that little child's raised up to the sun, by his paternal aunt, and he's giving a small little piece of sweet corn mudding in their mouth and give them the Hopi name, and that's part of our baby naming ceremony. So we're integrated into that. Integrated into that much. And there's one thing that people have to really understand, as beautiful as these things are, they are place-based, that certain things grow in certain places, certain things are done in certain places. And so, we don't look at just the soil. Like, for example, regenerative also just looks at the soil. We look at the whole land. That's a big difference there, right? And, like one of my famous quotes is like, Hopi's the only place that I know that our corn is made to fit the environment and not the environment manipulated to fit the corn. If you really think about that, that's a pretty strong statement, right? And so, that's kind of how I look at things, and that's pretty much about the answer to that question, I guess. So thanks.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Anna and Costa, I'm wondering if we can come back to you. So, there's many different stories and threads and issues that are portrayed in the film. But of course, one of the big one is climate change, which is, one of the central issues of our time that we're all thinking about, and that's going to affect us even more in the years and decades moving forward. So I'm wondering if you could tell us or talk to us about how you think climate change relates to some of these native stewardship stories.
Yeah, I mean, I think like we were touching on a little bit in the beginning, trying to reframe this concept of just solutions is like, this really is about continuation of practices. And part of what me and Anna have, gotten to learn and are still learning is, that a lot of the environmental issues that we have are a direct result of disruption of native stewardship of land. And, you can trace that back to a lot of the stories in the film. If you look at, turning, 60 million buffalo, free ranging across the plains, and like one of the most, carbon sequestering environments in the world. And then you plow that up and you remove the buffalo and you remove the stewards, you're actually hugely contributing to climate change. And so, I mean, if you look at, I think, and part of what we're trying to tell in that story is definitely that when you look across the board, as landscapes have been changed by industrialization, colonization, and monoculture and capitalism, basically, that's when you start to see, degradation of land and carbon being lost and biodiversity going down, So I think, and Michael could speak to this really well because, he does a lot of this work now, but when you kind of look across the board at, what native land stewardship is, that everything that we've gotten to document is so much about preserving biodiversity and preserving trees and preserving ecosystem services in the landscape. So yeah, I mean, I think it touches on all aspects of the people we got to spend time with. But yeah, I'd love to hear Michael's thoughts on this too.
Yeah, and I have a quick addition to that. It's interesting to think about how a lot of the practices in the film, I mean, we're in this incredibly dire situation with climate change at this moment. So we're starting to look to Native people kind of at the last minute in the hour. And a lot of the practices that we have been documenting are practices that are just starting back up now. The buffalo came back in 1970. The prescribed fire came back 10 years ago. Was the K1 crew was able to start putting fire back on the landscape. So in terms of solving climate change, we still have time if we look to Native stewards and if we give them the credit and power that they should have in this space.
Great. Michael, do you want to jump in there and add anything? Obviously, you come from a land of climate extremes.
Yeah, I mean, our climate change, we definitely do feel it, we're able to recognize, but we're able to recognize things like drought. But that all that corn behind me, that's been here for well over 2,000 years. I can plant it down 6 inches, even a foot and a half down, it'll still come up, and so, but the biodiversity, as everybody knows, biodiversity is really the key to sustainability. If you don't have biodiversity, you don't have true sustainability. And so, when I mentioned that quote about the 80% of global biodiversity on indigenous lands, that's so important. We need to find ways to protect that and uplift those people, and it has to be an equal partnership. It can't be, well, here's the information and, here's the data, and then, you go run with it, do what you want with it. It has to be acknowledged, and some of that data has to be kept in places where not everybody can look at it, let the tribes run it and practice their own self-determination and let them handle it the way they handle it. And so, I'm a big supporter of self-determination. That's something that we strive for here in our little areas, and so that's important to us. And everybody kind of knows about that. But as far as what Anna and Costa are saying, that they brought that to the point of this film. I think they showed the biodiversity that was needed and that we've been doing. And even though they said some of these prescribed burns started up at 10 years ago, or the buffalo came back in 73, they still came back. I think that's the most important thing. And there's that resiliency that Dorothy was talking about. That's what it's about. It was never lost. It was put on pause, and now it's back. And so we're back. And so that's probably the most important thing too. And so that's about all I want to say on that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Dorothy, why don't we circle back to you? That theme that Michael was just talking about, that resiliency, that renewal we were talking about earlier, does come right back to repatriation. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little about a case of repatriation you're particularly proud of, or somewhere you thought it worked really well, and something along those lines.
Yeah, so the conversation has really been reminding me of one repatriation that I worked on, and it was actually for the remains of a woman from my own tribe. And so it was kind of, at the same time, it was, one of the hardest ones I've ever done, but it was also one of the most rewarding, to be able to help this woman go back home. And what happened during that repatriation was we had representatives from there are 3 federally recognized Choctaw tribes. And so there were 3 representatives present at the museum, and we went, as usually happens, we toured the collections just, for people to see what was there. And so, the 4 of us were going through the collections and looking at Choctaw items and just sharing information. And so, I had the information that the museum had about the items, and then the tribal representatives had other information to share. And we talked about language. We talked about, different items had names, and sometimes the names weren't the same in the 3 tribes, just because of the way history had happened, and tribes, the removal of tribes from Mississippi. But we also looked at items like some of the basket, the large baskets that the museum has. And, those were made of river cane, which doesn't grow the way it used to. There used to be huge forests, basically, of river cane. And so that, the items in the collections and in that particular repatriation, it brought all of us together to be able to talk about these items, and to be able to do the right thing for our ancestor. But it also gave us, the ability to be present with these items in the collections, and talk about them, and remember things that might otherwise have been lost, and including that environmental knowledge about, certain plants used for dyes and cane used for baskets. It was a remarkable experience.
Yeah, thank you. I can easily say, being at the museum for 13 years, my proudest moments and the best moments at the museum have been centered around repatriation and seeing what repatriation can do for communities and people. It's really pretty amazing. I want to pivot. We've got a lot of great questions coming in from the audience. So I want to pivot to one question from the audience. And I want to start off with one in particular that kind of goes to sort of like all of you, and we'll see who won't do a Hunger Games thing. We'll try to get everybody jumping at the same time, but it's a broad question. And this one, maybe more for Dorothy and Michael, but certainly for Anna and Costa too. So they're wondering if there are any lessons learned going from working with tribes in an academic context to this much more on the ground approach.
Go ahead, Dorothy.
That's the easy question, right? We had to go for the hard one from the audience first.
So what, the work we do in repatriation, we are required by law to consult with tribes, and that's true for a lot of other instances in federal agencies. There are many laws that require consultation, and consultation is not just this matter of sending a letter to a tribe or calling somebody up and telling someone something, but it's being engaged with the tribal community, working hand in hand in collaboration on a project. So, you may be doing an academic project and think, I'm going to research, language or, some aspect of tribal culture, but you need to make certain that you are working in partnership and that you're not simply taking something from a tribe for your own benefit that the tribe will not benefit from. Tribes have knowledge that has been preserved for millennia, as the film showed, and people are willing to work with non-tribal members on various things, but it really needs to be done in collaboration.
I could speak from my own experience at the University of Arizona. Even though I am from this tribe, the Hopi tribe, a lot of my work was done out here, and so I had to go through the same process that the non-Hopi would have to go through as far as getting a permit from the Hopi Culture Preservation Office. And I'm proud to say that I did that. I have the certificate so that I did that, right? Because that is important. Dorothy is right. There is a lot of knowledge that needs to be protected, and it belongs to the tribe. And so it needs to be it just needs to be that way. The same thing with the data, which I just talked about. It needs to be kept in the hands of the tribe. And so, so that's kind of how I would answer that one. It was kind of difficult at first because I was like, well, here I am, a member of the Hopi tribe, and I should be able to get this thing, but it's academics too, and so it's a learning lesson, and it allows me to carry over some of this stuff to other people who either want to work here or work with other tribes, because you really have to respect the self-determination of the tribe, because that's what it's really about. It's all about that recognition. So that's what I'm saying now. Thanks.
So while we're on the subject of academics, actually, sorry, Anna and Costa, did you want to weigh in on that one at all?
I think something that I learned is maybe as a Western researcher to try to reconsider your assumptions at the very beginning, like doing research on drought in the Southwest. The practical solution would be irrigate, but like Michael shows in the film, like they don't irrigate for so many reasons, and that is what led to this resilience. So just at the get-go, just try to reconsider your assumptions and listen to the experts first, and try to do what is helpful, not what you want to research.
Yeah,
I would say too, the word expert is pretty interesting, and Michael talks about it a lot, because someone could be an expert about a native tribe potentially, but not necessarily have any understanding of experience in the culture or any understanding. So I think that word expert is definitely something to be examined for sure.
Yeah, definitely. While we're on the topic of kind of academics, Michael, so much of your story traces you through getting your PhD and navigating these two very different worlds, and I think that's a challenge a lot of Indigenous people face going into schools. And there's a question from our audience about that for Dorothy and Michael. This comes to us from Georgia, and Georgia says, "I'm a social worker hoping to do my doctorate on community approaches to climate change prevention. What is your top piece of advice for working to bring more recognition to these solutions?"
I'm not too sure how to answer that one. I think, you know, I know that the lady Georgia going to get her doctorate, that's a big step, you know, and that's important. I could probably explain more about, you know, how to get the funding and some of the stuff that I went through, but you know, but my main advice to anybody to get a doctorate is to have an advisor who's open-minded, who listens, who does those things, who can be a guide, and who's always going to be there. You know, I don't know if you know this, but you know, the more higher you go in your education as a Native person, the more funding becomes available. I can just tell you that right now. And so it's a good thing to do, but it's a very tough challenge. It's a very tough road. I mean, we talked about experts here for just a second. You know, I mean, just the other day I was giving a lecture at St. Carlos Apache tribe, and one of the young men says, "So you're an expert now in Hopi agriculture," you know, and I get that same criticism time when I'm at home, you know, especially by the elderly generation out here. You know, they say you're giving talks on Hopi, you know, you're in you know, about the agriculture, and everybody thinks you're an expert in it. And I said, no, I'm not an expert. You know, I'll be the first to admit that I'm not an expert, you know, and so I'm just a novice when it comes to some of these people who farm out here. And so, you know, the real experts to me in anywhere are the women, you know, and a lot of people don't know that about us, that our society is matrilineal. And so it's not the land. We don't own the land. We don't own the fields. You know, we don't even own the harvest. The women own all that. You know, they're the ones who do all the seed selection. They're the ones who put things away for us men to go out there and kind of act like Shrek, you know, go out there and just move around and plant, you know, and stuff like that. But, you know, it's more than that, you know. And so, you know, when we talk about experts, we really have to look at the women, you know, and what they're doing for us, not only, you know, in Hopi society, but a lot of Native societies, in society in general. And so we just need to put our hands on that. So if I want to talk about expertise, you know, we need to talk to the women. And so I'm just a simple person here. And so I guess I hand it to Dorothy. I don't know, maybe I don't know. It sounds kind of crazy, but you know, that's just my thing. So.
Yeah, so I'm not sure either that I could really answer that question, but one thing that I really appreciated in the film, Michael, was when you were talking about the tensions of being an academic and being a Native person, because I had those two. I mean, I still have them now, but you know what you said about getting an advisor that understands what you're doing and will, you know, be sympathetic. That made all the difference to me when I was in graduate school. You know, I had someone who didn't think I was, you know, my ideas were so out of the ordinary because I wanted to bring in Native perspectives into archaeology. And, you know, it's hard, but once you get a doctorate, more people are willing to listen to you. So like I had the experience of, you know, I would say something and people would be like, you know, oh, what are you doing? That doesn't make any sense. And then, you know, a year later, I had a doctorate and I would say exactly the same thing. And people were, you know, well, that sounds very interesting, Dr. Lippert. And it wasn't any different, you know, from what some of my friends were saying who didn't have degrees at all. You know, we all had this, you know, same opinion about things like repatriation, but, you know, the degree really made a difference.
Yeah, kind of one of those sad factors. You carry all the knowledge with you already, and you can't get anyone to listen to you until you get the piece of paper that kind of puts you in the system, right? I want to shift gears over on another. We have two related questions. I think maybe we'll put this to Anna and Costa, but Michael, you should feel free to weigh in too. This is the first part of this. I'll read both of them because they're closely related. The first one comes from Veronica. And Veronica says she's curious to hear to what extent California is working with the Crook tribe on prescribed burning, and is it working or is it too late? And then Erica also chimed in with a similar question, which is I'd love to hear more about the relationship between Northern California tribes, CAL FIRE, and Park Services. I'm especially curious about what that partnership looks like during an active wildfire.
Yeah, so I mean, first off, I'd like to say that part of putting the film in the world is we're launching an impact campaign, which is going to be a bunch of educational series kind of like this, but we're going to bring in a lot more other speakers from the film. And probably in June or July, if you follow like our social media and stuff, we're going to be doing a Kotutwa tribe educational series and bring in a bunch of the prescribed fire crew and bring in some of the folks you saw in the film. So I would just suggest definitely tuning in and listening from these experts really. But I guess in our personal experience, the Kirk tribe was never given any land. There was never any treaties because of the mining prospects in their ancestral land. So they have zero sovereignty on any of their ancestral territory. So their fight has been a never-ending struggle with getting the opportunity and ability to burn on what is U.S. forest land. It's all Forest Service, and that's been a really complicated relationship, as we talked about in the film. In the past 5 years, they told us that they've seen a little bit more interest in work. CAL FIRE has been more supportive. As wildfires are hitting record highs, literally the past 2 years were the record of all time that's ever been recorded. So there's definitely more recognition happening. But the Karuk tribe, especially with the folks we met, they were saying, we're burning maybe a couple hundred acres. We have a couple million acres we need to be burning. So there was this constant feeling of like, it's good that we're starting again. It's good we're getting burn permits, but there's a lot of complications. They have to get a very complicated process of getting a burn permit. And the time they actually want to burn is, usually not when they can get permits. And so there's a lot of complexity with that. And hopefully, as they get more recognition and more sovereignty on their territory. But yeah, I think, as you'll hear from them when we get a group together, there's a long way to go.
Anna, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think Costa did a really good job. It's really complicated, and they have to work with different organizations. And I think it makes it so that the responsibility is also on these different non-governmental organizations and other people that have land and power in Northern California to see how they can get prescribed burns put on their land, because I think almost all of the prescribed burns that are happening out there have some type of native influence. But it's just, people in power in Northern California should figure out how they can get that good medicine back on the land.
Yeah, and just this last year, there was a massive wildfire that affected a Karuk territory town of Happy Camp up there, way up on the Klamath River, and hundreds of homes were lost, and a lot of Karuk people lost, everything. And they have been saying, continue to say, that would not have happened if they'd been doing traditional burning around the village, and creating this safety net so the wildfire cannot enter. So there's a long way to go, and we hope to bring more of those people on to get more of those conversations going.
Yeah, Michael, did you work with Karuk at all, or do you have any contact?
No, I didn't. But it's kind of a policy question there. For the longest time, Indians have not been able to manage their own lands, and there's a piece of legislation that was acted in 1993 called the Indian Natural Resource Management Act. And in that act called for active resource management plans that tribes can do to kind of manage their own lands and do kind of what they see fit. But unfortunately, like a lot of Indian legislation since 1993, it was never once been funded, not once. And so that's just the way the world bounces. And so, but I can feel for those people. Some of these techniques are good, but but just by saying that, that's why I keep saying collaboration is very, very important between non-Indians and Indians. But we need to be at the table in order we can have that collaboration succeed more than anything else. And so those things shouldn't be happening. People shouldn't be losing their homes, whether they be Indian or non-Indian. We all have the same values to some extent, and we need to take care of each other, because that's what it's really about, right? That's what Indian people have been doing for centuries. We've been taking care of each other. And an example of that is look what's happening in Oklahoma now. You have a lot of Indian Health Service operations taking care of the non-Indians and giving them their shots, their COVID shots. And so we're still doing that today. We've been doing that since 1492, and we're still doing it today, right? And so, it's one of those things, kind of a little play on humor right there, but that's who we are. We're a society who likes to give, And so, you know, we'll continue to do so. And so that's about how I'll answer that question.
Yeah, Mike, I want to stick with you for a second and ask another question that came in from Veronica. This one says, are younger Hopis interested to get back into farming, and what has been their response to your work?
Yeah, I mean, I've just had, you know, before the COVID came, and I had some local community schools out here bring their Head Start kids up there. I have the beautiful picture of that, where there's like 30 little Head Start kids, couldn't be more than 2 to 5 years old, you know, walking around my house, and I give them all a ear of corn. And, you know, the other day too, I had some young people come up and ask me, you know, how can we get farming started and things like that. And, you know, so there's definitely an interest out here. You know, I mean, we've got 2 great organizations. We got the Hopi Not Winnie Foundation, which is a part of the Hopi Foundation, and we also got Hopi Permaculture, you know, another great organization. So we're starting to try to bring the younger ones in. You know, it's kind of hard. You know, I always like to tell my story. You know, when I was their age, like 9 or 10, I was bored, you know, and I told my grandfather that I was bored. And then the next day he was throwing water on my face at 5:30 in the morning and dragging me out to the fields and fixing fences and, and all that stuff, you know, that grandpas do. And so I never said I was bored again. And so, you know, that's one of the most important things we got to remember. You know, it's just, you know, encouraging our youth. And so we're trying to do that out here. It's a struggle, but it's there because it's ingrained in us and it's who we are as Hopi. And so we'll keep continuing to do that. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'm wondering, I want to turn to you, Dorothy, for a second here. We got a question that came in, or really a comment from Jackie, and she's asking, and maybe we can draw on some of your broad knowledge about tribal communities over time. She says she would like to engage Indigenous people in a teaching garden of native edibles, but she needs to find people, and we have no identified tribes in our state. So I'm wondering, maybe, you know, what do you suggest?
I guarantee that there are Indian people in that state, whatever state it is. You know, there are Indian people everywhere. And you know, in Virginia, we didn't, you know, for a long time we had no federally recognized tribes, but there were many tribal groups that existed. And then, you know, now there are 7. But it, you know, again, it was that thing that, you know, the piece of paper that got signed. And so now people are, now we'll engage with you in the government to government relationship. But so to start with, you know, you might look into what tribes used to be in your state, you know, according to the, you know, official history, because I would bet that those people are still there. They're just not in a recognized community. There may also be intertribal organizations, and that was a big part of you know, my experience in Texas. Is we had in, you know, all of the big cities had an intertribal group to work with, and especially at the universities there were student organizations for Native students. And so there, you know, there are many ways to connect with Native communities. But I guess, you know, one thing to toss out is this idea that there aren't tribes in your state, because I'm sure that there are. And just, you know, be broader in the way you look for Indian people, and, you know, consider whether there's there might be a state, you know, Native Heritage Commission, there might be a tribal organization at the university, you know, things like that.
Hey, Tori, if we could just mention on our website, we have some educational resources that are free for people to check out. And one of them is a link to a really powerful map called nativeland.ca. It's native-land.ca. And it's a new project where you can type in your address and it will show you a map of ancestral territories and what native land you are on. And then following up with what Michael said, there's also links to support those 2 foundations that Michael spoke about. Hopi Permaculture Kotutwa, I think it's called, and then the other one. So Michael gave us links to those foundations if you want to donate to those. So those are also on our website.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Native Land is certainly a really, really good resource that's growing all the time. I want to ask a question that I think maybe, you know, we can sort of pitch to everyone. Maybe we'll start with you, Michael. And this is sort of top of my mind too. I was just listening to a story, I think it was yesterday morning on NPR, about about Deb Haaland and the new Secretary of Interior. And so this question from Julian says, what do you think it will mean to the issues raised in the film that a Native American woman, Deb Haaland, is now Secretary of the Interior? So Michael, why don't we go to you?
First of all, I would like to say that, I would support her in anything that she does. She always has a proven track record. She's always, worked for her people in the state of New Mexico. And so I see some positive things on the front. If you look at some of the stuff that the Indian Agricultural Council is putting out, they have a daily link about some of the policies that are coming out there. I would advise them to turn to that, because I think some of this stuff's gonna turn for the better, and it's not so much that, Deb Haaland has a job, she's Secretary of the Interior. She's not Secretary of the Indians. She has a lot of other things that she has to do too, and so, but I'm glad to see a representative from an Indian nation in that position, and I really appreciate that. So, that's about as much as I was gonna say on that, but I do support her, and I'm glad that she's in there. Thanks a lot.
Dorothy, you wanna?
Well, I'll just add that I think her experience of being a Native woman, she brings that worldview of kind of the interconnectedness of people and nature, and just this idea that we see it all the time when we have tribal visitors with the repatriation office, but the ways that people talk about plants and animals, and we look at items in the collections that are made from plants and animals, and people talk about them as relatives, because in this way of thinking, we're all relatives, and there's a sense of being responsible. You're responsible to take care of your relatives, and I think that's a concept that that's in non-native culture, to take care of your relatives. But native culture, you have this broader idea of who your relatives are, and so I think Deb, by Secretary Haaland, I think she'll bring that to her work as Secretary of the Interior, and I think there may be a broader way of thinking about the work that she does in that office.
And Costa, do you want to jump in on that at all? I think because you've had a sort of 30,000 foot view of all of this in some ways.
How powerful is she? I am so happy to see her, and I'm so happy to see more representation in just mainstream news and everything too. It's great that she's there.
Yeah, and one of the a quote I remember that someone told us out there was you can't be what you can't see, and I think her presence now in such a high level of being able to manage so much land, I think for Native youth is a really important, and for all people to see what's possible, when we have much better leadership.
Yeah. So I want to circle back to just a quick question somebody had earlier. A Karuk series was mentioned. Is there a way people can get more information on that series?
It'll be on our website. It's still in process. But
okay.
Film.com.
Yeah, sometime this summer. So just stay tuned through our website.
Okay. We're coming up on 8 o'clock, and so I want to pose one last question, and I think all of you can weigh in on this. So this question is: the film focuses on traditional ecological knowledge and ethnobotany. We have a question that focuses on kind of everything you've talked about, which is: how do we reconcile or better educate people about traditional practices and knowledge in addition to Western science practices? So maybe we should start with you, Michael, since you're kind of bridging that divide there.
I think it's just inviting into these conversations that we're having. The groups on sustainability, the green movement. Like I said, just inviting Native people to look at these things. I had a display at the Arizona State Museum one time that was called 2,000 Years of Resiliency by the Hopi farmers. And it's just that kind of thing. But, it's that exhibit right there, all the photographs were in color. You know, it was done looking at us as contemporary human beings. You know, that's kind of a sad thing to say, but you know, a lot of times when I go to the museums, we're just still stuck in black and white. You know, we're still stuck with the feathers and all the other stuff that goes around there, and I'm not a big fan of that. And so, but you know, for the most part, I think, you know, as far as our traditional ecological knowledge is concerned, you know, if you're getting assistance by a Native person, make sure that that person is also acknowledged for his contributions that he makes. You know, there's a lot of people that have been writing stuff out there that aren't Native, who have no background information and just write. You know, they don't have that in-depth understanding of what they're writing about. And so, you know, one of my main things to do, and one of my main things also, is try to increase the number of Indigenous people who are in the sciences who actually practice these things. You know, I'm very lucky because I practice these things on a daily basis, you know, and so I have two good things. I have a PhD and I'm also a farmer. You know, I'm thinking I'm more happy as a farmer sometimes than as a PhD, but that goes not much to be said on that one. But anyways, you know, it's just one of those things. And so, you know, that'd be my advice on that, but thanks a lot.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very important to bring more Native people into the sciences. And, you know, there are great organizations like ACES and SACNOS that promote, you know, Native students in the sciences. You know, certainly it's been important in archaeology to have more Native Americans become archaeologists and bring different perspectives to the work. And so that, you know, that's one of the things that's personally important to me. And you know, when I can, I try to, you know, reach out with, you know, to Native kids to talk about archaeology and show them that, you know, this is really good work and there's a place for them in it, even though it might be hard at you know, at times. You know, it's a good thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, that reconciliation is like such a big, important thing. And like the film, what we're talking about, like the disruption, you have to acknowledge like what happened and try to reconcile the wrongs that have been done, which is really hard work. So to better reconcile the work that you're doing as a researcher, it requires like a really sensitive look at what is happening and what your intentions are. And if there's a way to leverage the power that is in academics and in the sciences to help one community or one thing come back, I think it's better to focus on one relationship that you can have and really make that a strong relationship than try to do a really broad sweeping thing across several different groups, because I think it can be more meaningful if you can do one thing and do it with really good intention and do it really well. And there's a lot of power in academics, and I think that could be a really great entry point into helping Native practices get back into all of these different bioregions.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, one thing that Michael, you know, when we first were talking to Mike about, like, you know, we'd love to help tell your story more, and, you know, what's the best way, you know, and his first response was just like, come out, come hang out, come help out, come, you know, like, come out here and see what we do and hang out with me, and like, let's form a relationship first. And so I think, you know, a lot of our learning and our process has been like, you know, how do you form relationships with people and how do you form trust? And that's kind of where it starts, I think.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, that's about all the time we have has flown by. I want to ask everyone out there to join me in thanking tonight's speakers, Dorothy, Anna, Costa, and Michael. This has really been fantastic and hit home a lot of issues, like I said at the beginning, that I personally have been thinking a lot about. And also, I just, you know, the film has so many messages in it, but one that I can't keep getting over is the simple one is the need to listen and learn from Indigenous peoples. And then what we're just talking about now is to take action. So thank you to all of you for a great discussion. I want to thank all the production team that helped out on the back end. I want to thank the Washington, D.C. Environmental Film Festival. I'd also like to give a special thanks to those people who made today's program possible. So our donors, volunteers, and of course, viewers like you that joined us tonight. And I'd like to thank all of our partners who help us reach, educate, and empower millions of people around the world today and every day. Thank you. Can't thank you enough.